Every hotel runs on a promise most guests never think about. That somewhere, overnight, while everyone sleeps, someone is quietly making sure the numbers add up. Rooms sold, rooms empty, charges posted, accounts balanced. It's boring work, most nights. Nobody tells ghost stories about spreadsheets. Tonight's story is about a night auditor named Neil Ferris, a mid-size hotel called the Ashford, and one room that kept generating charges no living guest could have made. If you've ever worked a job where your entire task is making sure two numbers match, you know the particular unease of watching them refuse to. Keep that feeling in mind. It's the whole shape of what happened to Neil. Neil was 28, 3 years into the night audit position at the Ashford Hotel, a respectable 4-story property downtown that had been quietly hosting business travelers and wedding parties for almost 60 years. His job, every night between 11 and 7, was simple in description and tedious in practice. Reconcile the day's charges against the day's payments, close out the hotel's books, generate the morning reports that told management exactly how the previous 24 hours had gone. Room service, minibar, parking, phone charges, on the rare occasion anyone still used a hotel room phone. Every charge needed a room number, and every room number needed to make sense against who was actually staying there. The Ashford wasn't a glamorous property, but it had a kind of dignity to it that Neil had grown fond of over 3 years. Original crown molding in the lobby that management had never bothered to modernize away. A front desk made of real dark wood instead of laminate. Elevators with brass numbers above the doors that clicked audibly as they climbed. It was the kind of hotel that attracted repeat business travelers who liked routine, and older guests who remembered when hotels used to look like this everywhere. Neil sometimes thought the building had more personality than most of the people who passed through it. It was work Neil was good at, in the unglamorous way accountants and auditors are good at things. Patient, exact, undistracted by a lobby that emptied out by midnight and stayed empty until the early business travelers started drifting down for coffee around 5. He liked the quiet. He liked the specific satisfaction of a report that balanced perfectly, every charge accounted for, every number where it belonged. The trouble started with room 214 on a Wednesday night in early spring when Neil ran the day's audit and found a room service charge posted at 1:14 a.m. A club sandwich and a ginger ale, $18 and change, attached to a room that the hotel's booking system listed as vacant. Neil's first assumption was the obvious one, a keying error. Front desk staff made mistakes sometimes, posted a charge to the wrong room, especially during a busy check-in rush. He pulled up the room's history to reassign the charge properly and found that room 214 hadn't had a guest in it for 4 nights. No reservation, no key card issued. Empty, according to every system the hotel used to track that kind of thing. He voided the charge, reassigned it to a miscellaneous account pending investigation, made a note for the day manager, and thought nothing more of it. Hotels are strange places sometimes. Systems glitch. He'd seen odder things in 3 years, a phantom parking charge that had repeated itself nightly for a week before IT finally traced it to a stuck sensor. A housekeeping report that insisted a room was occupied for 2 days after the guest had checked out and driven home. Buildings full of numbers occasionally produce numbers that don't mean anything. That was Neil's entire working theory of the world, right up until room 214 did it again. It happened the following Wednesday, same day of the week, which Neil noted with the specific attentiveness of someone whose job was noticing patterns. Another room service charge, this time a bottle of red wine and a slice of chocolate cake, posted at 1:14 a.m. exactly, down to the minute, attached again to room 214, which was, once more, entirely vacant according to every booking record the hotel maintained. Neil sat with that one a little longer before voiding it. The exact repetition of the timestamp bothered him in a way the first charge hadn't. Not just the same room, but the same minute, down to the digit, as though something were following a schedule rather than making a mistake. He mentioned it to Gail, the hotel's longtime front desk supervisor, a woman in her late 50s who had worked at the Ashford for over 20 years, and who Neil had always found to be the most reliably unbothered person on staff. The kind of colleague who'd seen every version of hotel chaos there was to see and treated all of it with the same calm efficiency. Gail's reaction was the first sign Neil had that this wasn't simply a glitch. 214, she said, not quite a question, in the particular tone of someone confirming a detail she already suspected. What kind of charge this time? Wine and cake. Same as last week, basically. Different item, same time. 1:14 a.m. Gail was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that made Neil realize she wasn't surprised, only tired. You've had it happen twice now? Twice, both Wednesdays. It'll be 3, Gail said. It's always in 3s, near as anyone's ever tracked it. Then it stops for a while. Neil asked her what she meant by anyone's ever tracked it. And Gail, in the unhurried way of someone deciding a younger colleague had finally earned an explanation, told him what she knew. Room 214, Gail explained, had a history at the Ashford that predated Neil's employment by well over a decade. Long enough that most current staff had never heard it directly, only absorbed it the way old buildings pass down their odd habits, secondhand and half-remembered. Sometime in the hotel's earlier years, a long-term guest had stayed in that room for the better part of a winter. An older man, by every account Gail had ever heard, quiet and polite, the kind of long-stay guest that hotels sometimes accumulate without anyone quite noticing how long they've been there. Gail herself had only worked at the Ashford 8 years at that point, not long enough to have known him, but long enough to have inherited the story from people who had. He'd apparently been the sort of guest the staff genuinely liked, tipped the housekeepers generously, remembered the front desk staff's names, ordered the same simple meal from room service most nights because he said it reminded him of something from years before he'd ever come to stay there. Nobody Gail had spoken to could say for certain why he'd been staying so long, only that he seemed to have nowhere else he particularly wanted to be, and the hotel had never minded the steady business. He had died in that room. Not violently, nothing dramatic, simply an elderly man whose heart had given out sometime in the night, discovered by housekeeping the next morning, room service tray from the evening before still sitting untouched on the desk. A club sandwich, Gail said. Which was, she pointed out to Neil, the same order that had shown up on the ghost charge that first Wednesday. Neil felt something cold settle into his stomach at that detail, the specific correspondence of it. He asked Gail whether the charges had always matched what the original guest had ordered. Not always exactly, she said, but close. Whoever's tracked it over the years, and it's not many of us, most people who notice it either transfer out or stop asking questions. The pattern is that the orders repeat what he used to get. Sandwiches, wine sometimes, a pot of tea more than once. Never anything he wouldn't have ordered when he was alive. It's like the room's remembering him instead of haunting anybody, if that makes any sense. Neil asked, because it was the obvious question and he couldn't not ask it, what happened after the third charge, what stops for a while actually meant, and whether it ever escalated into anything worse than an $18 sandwich nobody ate. Gail's answer, when it came, was careful, in a way that told Neil she'd thought about this question longer than she was letting on. There was one night, she said, years before you started here, when someone didn't just void the charge and move on. A night auditor back then, I won't say who, out of respect, got curious after the second charge in a row, went up to 214 during the slow hours, let himself in with a master key, wanting to see if maybe some guest really was squatting in there somehow. Some explanation that made sense. And the room was empty, Gail said. Bed made, nobody there, nothing out of place. Except the room service tray from the night before was sitting on the desk, and it wasn't a mess like it should have been if it was just sitting there uneaten and going stale. It was arranged. Napkin folded, fork and knife set just so, the way a hotel tray looks when it's freshly delivered, not the way it looks after it's been sitting for a day. Neil didn't say anything to that. Gail continued. He told the day manager the next morning that he wasn't going to go up there again if it happened a third time. Said something in the room felt like it was aware he'd come in, even though nothing moved, nothing spoke, nothing did anything you could point to and call proof. He just said it felt occupied in a way an empty room isn't supposed to feel. And then he quit, about 2 months later. Not because of that, he said, but he also stopped picking up any shift that put him in the building past midnight. And eventually that meant there weren't many shifts left he was willing to take. Neil went home that morning with the story sitting uneasily in his chest and told himself, the way people do, that he simply wouldn't go up to 214 if a third charge appeared. He would void it, note it, and let the pattern run its course the way Gail said it always had. 3 charges, then a long, quiet stretch, sometimes months, before it started again. The third charge came the following Wednesday at 1:14 a.m., exactly as predicted. A pot of tea and a small dish of rice pudding. Room 214, still vacant, still unoccupied by any guest the hotel's systems could account for. Neil voided it as he had the others. He did not go upstairs. He told himself this was simply professional discretion, the same instinct that kept him from investigating a stuck parking sensor personally instead of calling IT. Not everything on your ledger needs a physical inspection, and some mysteries are outside your job description no matter how curious you are. But at around 3 a.m. that same night, sitting at the front desk finishing his reports, Neil heard the elevator at the far end of the lobby chime and begin to move on its own, rising from the lobby level toward the upper floors without anyone having called it. He watched the floor indicator climb, 2, 3, and stop at 4, where room 214 sat at the end of the east hallway. The doors, according to the indicator, opened. Neil sat very still at the front desk, fully aware that no guest was checked into any room that would explain that elevator movement, and made the decision, deliberate, considered, the same decision the auditor from Gail's story had made too late, not to go up and look. He sat with that decision for several minutes, listening to a hotel that was, on every visible surface, completely silent, and eventually heard the elevator chime again and watched the indicator descend back to the lobby, doors opening onto an entirely empty car. Neil finished his shift that night with his hands not quite steady on the keyboard and told Gail everything the next evening before she left for the day. Gail listened, nodded slowly, and told him this was, as far as she knew, only the second time in the hotel's history that the pattern had extended past the third charge into anything else. The first being the story of the auditor who'd gone up to look. "You didn't go up," she said. It wasn't quite a question, but there was real relief in how she said it. "I didn't." "Good," Gail said. "I think that matters more than anything else in this whole story. Whatever's in 214, it's never once come looking for anybody who left it alone. It's only ever the ones who went looking that it seemed to notice back." Neil asked her, the way he'd asked before, what she thought was actually happening, whether she believed, genuinely, that the old guest was still there in some form, still ordering his evening tray, still riding the elevator up to a room he'd once called home for a whole winter. Gail considered this for a long moment before answering, and her answer was the closest thing to a real theory Neil ever got out of her. "I think some people leave an impression on a place the way a body leaves a shape in a mattress," she said. "You can't always see it, but you can feel where someone used to be. Most of the time that fades. I think, for whatever reason, this one just never quite has. And I think the polite thing, the smart thing, is to let a resting impression rest, instead of poking at it to see if it notices you poking." Neil still works the night audit at the Ashford Hotel. Room 214 still generates its occasional set of 3 charges, always on a Wednesday, always at 1:14 a.m., always matching some version of a meal an elderly man might have ordered on a quiet winter evening decades ago. Neil voids each charge without comment, notes it in the log the way hotel policy requires, and does not go upstairs. He has, in the 2 years since that first Wednesday, come to think of it less as a haunting and more as a standing entry in the hotel's books that simply never quite closes out. A small, permanent imbalance that no amount of auditing will ever make disappear, because it was never really an error to begin with. Some debts, Neil has decided, aren't meant to be settled. They're only meant to be acknowledged by whoever happens to be on shift when they come due. New night auditors have come and gone at the Ashford in the time since. The position turns over every year or two, the way entry-level hotel jobs tend to. And Neil has made it a quiet point to tell each of them about room 214 before their first Wednesday shift, the same way Gail once told him. He doesn't dress it up or make it sound worse than it is. He simply tells them what to expect, what to do, and, more importantly, what not to do, and lets them decide for themselves what they believe is actually happening 4 floors above the front desk. Most of them handle it the way he did. They void the charge, they don't go upstairs, and after a few cycles of it, they stop being unsettled by a sandwich that never gets eaten. A couple of them, over the years, have asked him the same question he once asked Gail: whether he believes it's really the old guest, still there in some form. Neil's answer has settled, over time, into something close to what Gail told him, though he's added a piece of his own to it. If you ever find yourself working somewhere alone at night, and the numbers don't quite balance no matter how carefully you check them, you might want to consider that some ledgers were never meant to close, and that the safest thing you can do when something in the building seems to be remembering someone who's gone is let it remember in peace. This has been a Whisper Dark original. If this one made you think twice about that quiet hotel hallway at 1 a.m., you know what to do. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the dark next time.